welcome back. This is another video of Turd's journey through my tournament, Triad Wars 1, where he takes on various AIs I've constructed. We can see the bracket here. Turdz has made it to the third round, which is the big round in triple Triad tournaments, or at least one of them, because if you reach round 4 in most tournaments, back in the very start, tournaments tended to be 7 rounds. Later on, they dropped to 5 and even 4. But for most of triple Triad TTA's run, tournaments were 6 rounds long, and round 4 meant you were in the final 8, which meant you were getting a quarterfinals icon for your work. So if Turdz can win, he gets the icon. If he loses here, he goes out with nothing. So the rule set, level 6 and 8, same plus wall combo, must use at least 2 level 6s. I think it's a kind of tricky rule set. I think in general, some of the cards that are really good on their level are not necessarily as good fighting other levels. For instance, if you were fighting 9s and 10s and had to use a level 5, maybe you'd use something like a 5-5-6-6, right? That's really good at plus walling 9s and 10s. But if you're fighting 7s and 8s, that card is very weak. And so figuring out which level 8s are still going to be powerful and which level 6s are going to play well against level 8s, that's probably the bigger part, I think is very important to making good hands on this rule set. So I would probably be drawn to 9-8-5-4s, but I think I'm always drawn to 9-8-5-4s. 9-8-6s are another option. I think 8-7-6-5s are good, but a little weaker than they would normally be. They are very good at facing 9s and 8s, but if the level 6s eschew those cards for things that can fight 9s and 8s, it's not going to be quite as good at cleaning up against the level 6s as it often is at dealing with level 8s. So I'm not sure which way I'd go with this. I'd want to do some practice games first, which of course Turdz did not have the option to do. So here are the hands, and I will give Turdz commentary. Turdz is of course on the right in blue, and Karen is on the left in red from Shadow Hearts 2. Great game, you should all play it. What are the odds of both players selecting the exact same level 6s? Well, I did think they would work well against level 8s, and clearly they did too. And that would be because they have 1 gaps, right? The 8 and the 7, the 4 and the 3 are going to play well against 9s with plus wall. First impression of their hand was quite well put together, with clear opposite cards that should play well off each other, and 9-8-7s are quite strong level 8 cards, if not my personal favorite. The last card seems to be a utility card, and 8-7-6-5s are very good for that. Possible weaknesses to exploit were the relatively low numbers to the left and right, and repeated numbers, 3 8s going up, 3 7s to the right. This is an easy trap to fall into when hand-making, which on its own may not appear a problem. But if you end up in a late-game position with identical numbers to one side, the opponent can force you into leaving a combo open. All of this is very true. I would say about the red hand that it was designed based on this concept Piggyman came up with of if I have 2 pairs of cards and those 2 pairs share a pair of numbers with the other pair. So you can see the top 2 cards are opposite in the red hand, and the next 2 cards are also opposite. But you'll notice we graph the top card is a 7 to the right and an 8 down. And the third card also is a 7 to the right and an 8 down. And there's the same kind of pairing with an 8 and 7 on the other 2 cards. And that means you have this thing where you can continually play cards that work exactly opposite each other. And so any of the 4 top cards in Red's hand, if they go in 5, they will have at least 2 corners they can play in, setting up multiple sames. So it's a hand really well designed, I think, to play diagonally off itself. And it, of course, plans to have all those 7s facing the same direction because it thinks it can use them better than you can. But of course, as Turdz points out, there are endgame situations where those 7s can be punished because their only option will be to have a 7 to the right, whichever card they use. And if Turdz can combo off that, well, that's going to be deadly. I had a few starter ideas for this hand, but didn't originally plan any side starters. However, seeing the lack of high numbers to the right, this move stood out as an option to use up a level 6 card early. Not only that, their hand wasn't well set to deal with 8s or 9s and 3 or 9, which gave me an easy potential response if they played in the other spot. I favored this over the opposite 3, 7, 8, 4, and 4, because that didn't give me a perfect recapture and defense in 1. Because his recapture on the right side is often going to be 2, 6, 8, 9 with an outfacing 9 that they cannot take back if it goes in 3. But if 8, 9, 6, 2 were to go in 1, Red would have the plus wall with 3, 7, 8, 4. So I think this move makes sense. I think an interesting problem for Blue is they have 2 cards that Red's hand, their top 2 cards, the level 6s, is designed to play off really well. And so how do you use those cards without setting Red up? And as I hope I explained well, if those cards go in the side, in a corner or in the center, red is designed to make sure they can set up sames off it that blue will not also have. So I think putting it in a side where a kind of diagonal response is significantly less likely is a kind of good way to expend it in general. I think there's some other neat points. It sets up multiple plus walls for Turdz. Ifrit has a kind of strange plus wall with the 9 and the 2 from 9, and 2689 has a plus wall in 3. And so you can see how it's going to set up some synergies, and while it's a card that's going to have to set up some synergies for the opponent's hand, he's trying to kind of keep the damage minimal on that front. Will you go to the next slide? There you go. I've never been a fan of this sort of move, but it was effective here. It set up a same with a single card in 3 or 5, plus essentially giving them freedom to play any card in 3. The common response is to play in 3 and secure the spot easily, but here that didn't look great for me, as I then didn't have anything good for 5 if they played in 1, nor could I set it myself. Therefore, I looked to see if anything else worked. Yeah, I think this is one of those understandings of the L, where once cards are in 1 and 3 or in 3 and 9, whoever has a threat in 5 or can stop the other person being able to play in 5 is often going to kind of dictate the course of the game. And even though red doesn't have any safe card to put in 1 or 9 after Turdz would play in 3, because they have the threat in 5, it seems pretty likely to me, just from an intuitive feeling, that they're likely to get at least a tie there. So I think it made a lot of sense to start looking for other options, but it's very much not obvious where the other options should be, right? If you start in 1 or 9 yourself, they're going to get to go in 3, that's going to be locked in, and you still have to deal with the same kind of L. So I think a lot of closed players have a kind of instinct to go in 4 or 8 here, which is a pretty interesting concept. But again, if the opponent has a better move in 5, it seems unlikely. So I like what Turdz ended up with here, which is... I found a weird move here. I can't remember this formation ever coming up in a real game I played after 3 cards. However, they'd given up their 9 facing down, and they couldn't play anything in 5 to set up a capture on both sides, so this felt like a bit of a freebie. Defend, and force them to move the game on. Yeah, so Red chose to expend their most powerful downward-facing card, and Turdz takes advantage and finds a safe move. I also think if you just looked at, if you had a database of every triple triad game ever played, you'd find corner starters and side starters are significantly more common. Sorry, corner starters and center starters. I cannot speak today. I'm running on very little sleep. Corner starters and center starters are significantly more common than side starters. Okay, some rule sets side starters rise, like Laming and level 4 no rules tended to have side starters. But all in all, if you looked at every game, side starters clearly the least popular option. And players that employed them a lot, I always thought were kind of interesting styled players, not the standard mold. And then if you look at all the responses to a side starter, I believe the least common would be a nearby side. So here the starter was in 6 and a nearby side would be in 2 or 8. I think every other type, like a near corner, a far corner, the center, the far side, is overall more common in most play. And then, if you take that position and look, what's the least common move after that? I think you end up with a move in the far corner. So I think of any kind of position after 3 moves, this is the least likely one to actually occur you could construct, just looking at it in a vacuum, not looking at the actual cards. So I think it's cool it happened here. And I mean, I played thousands of games of Triple Triad. I think it's entirely possible I never actually had this set up on the board. I think it's entirely possible I did. But, there are so many positions. I had that hundreds, thousands of times. And this one, maybe I never had even once. So it's kind of cool we got it here, and it might be worth, pausing and looking at for a bit and thinking about. So they played in 3, which was expected. Looking at it again, 8, 4, 3, 7, and 9 might have given me some problems, but I think I saw a way out of that too. What this does now is give me a choice between 1 and 9, although I felt I needed to keep hold of Ifrit as the only card with any good upward power. Yeah, I like this decision, sorry. Oops, spoiled a move. Hopefully you don't rewind and see that if you didn't catch it. Yeah, so what I like about this move going in 1 rather than going in 9 is Ifrit has that potential plus wall in 9 with the 9 and the 2 plus walling the 3. And so if red ever takes their combo in 5, Turdz can combo back everything, right? The card in 6 takes the card in 3, takes the card in 2, and that's going to lock in so many cards. So by playing in 1 rather than 9, we keep a combo square and lower red's options. So 5 is now a disaster for red. Red also doesn't really have a good move in 4. the obvious move there is we graph in 4, 9, 7, 8, 1. But Ifrit can just take that, and then 2, 6, 8, 9 sweeps the bottom row, as Turdz pointed out from the very start of the game. Red is very weak going left and right, and if the game ends up on, 2 squares that are side to side, that's going to be a huge problem for Red's hand. So this is a pretty difficult position for Red, because the squares you normally want to go in are 4 or 5. Red can tie here, and if you want to pause and try to figure it out, you can. If you don't want to pause and figure it out, or you saw the move that was played, you can, of course, advance the video. So Turdz says, I felt like I was in a pretty strong place here. Their same in 5 now looked like my win, as did anything played in 4, or 9 for that matter. The move in 7 had swung the game around in my favor from what didn't look too pretty 2 moves in. Yeah, or so I thought. I missed that move, and it's a great one at that. Secures the tie, perhaps the only one there was, and they found it. Bit of an odd game, but I think well played by both sides. So the big point is Red wants to get the combo in 5 if Blue goes in 9, and if Blue tries to leave 9 open and keep Ifrit so that Ifrit can dominate in 9, Ifrit's not good in either of the other squares, so they can play in 9 and capture the card in 6, for instance, to even up the score 5-5, and then Ifrit won't have anything it can capture at the end. So this was a nice save by Karen here, and I think held the tie. I think very clearly Turdz was the one pressing this game, but I do like how Karen played it as well. I agree. I think it is a pretty well played game. And so we move on to the next one. You can calculate out from here. I tend not to show diagrams of the last few moves because I am lazy. But yeah, so tie here. And we reach Triad Wars 1, round 3, game 2. And this time Karen's going to go first. And Turdz says, all right, same hands, her first turn. Let's do this. After their starter in 5, I thought I had their plan at least partly figured out. Depending on my next move, they had the option of either 8, 1, 9, 7 in 1 or 9, which would set up a same on either side that would only require them to hold onto one card for the rest of the game. In the last round, the opponent didn't consider how to recapture their own starter in the endgame, whereas here they had a clear plan. That said, it's not necessarily unplayable, and the beauty of responding to a 5 starter is that all moves are potentially viable, depending on the situation. All that being said, I did look at a few spots and settled on playing in 7. A move in 3 or 7 had potential to disrupt their plan. While the 1-5-7 or 7-5-9 type setups can have merits, it can take some of the power away from the hand's plan, as it is often useful to secure the gap in the middle, or sometimes even play in one of the open adjacent sides. I figured it was more likely this move would force them to consider playing in 2, 3, or 6, which, while not bad options, would potentially disrupt their plans for the hand. So I love Turd's reasoning here. I think it is great. So the point is, and I'm just going to reiterate what he said in my own words because that's what I like to do, is if we graph 9781 goes in 1, if Elena 8197 goes in 1, then we graph will have the same in both 2 and 4. And if Elena goes in 9, then the 3784 will have the same in both 6 and 8. So red is very well set to play a move in 1 or 9, but not that well set to play a move in 3 or 7. So Turdz wants to maximally disincentivize red to play in those squares. And now if red plays in the corners they really want to play in, 1 or 9, that's going to give up a free square for Turdz to put a safe card in between. And if they go in 3, they don't look that well set up for that. It's not a corner they have near as perfect ideal setup for. And their hand, while powerful at playing off itself and setting up combos with itself, isn't necessarily like power cards, and so it might not have the taking capacity to play a powerful move in 2 or 6. So I think this is just a really, really solid response, and again fits kind of the same theme of the last game of, I have these 2 cards that your hand is designed to play off of, the 8437 and the 3784. I'm going to find squares to use them that you cannot play well off of, and be very careful to get out the low-level cards in my hand early, but also to really block up the board in just slightly uncomfortable ways. I don't have to make something you can't capture, though of course red also cannot capture this card from 8, which is very important, but just generally not give you free use of the squares you clearly want to set up, because red, given a free hand, has these corners they really want to play. And I don't know, I think this is a pretty exemplary first move against this type of hand, just showing a way to put serious pressure on it. Damn, this is another one of those moves that caught me out. I didn't reference 4 or 8 anywhere on my last note because I didn't give them more than a moment's consideration. Personally, this sort of move isn't one I'd usually look for, as it just feels suboptimal. It would usually give away the corner card for free. However, I can see why it was played, as I had no capture in 1. It pretty much forced me to play a capture in 9, and it felt like that was going to be a tie this time. Sorry, play a capture in 8. Sorry, I can't read. I played a capture in 8. How exciting. Yeah, this is going to be a tie. Tie confirmed. Seriously, can't these bots learn to screw up an easy tie at some point? So there are non-tying moves here. I suppose there are moves in 6, but any move like Elena in 3 is going to be a tie. So I think this was also a well-played game. You know, I don't really have a flaw here. I think 4 was kind of a bailout move, right? 8, 7, 6, 5, and 4 pretty directly led the game to a tie without too much to excite on the way, but also was very much Turdz made a really nice reply to a starter, and the opponent had to find a clear path to a tie or risk entering quite dangerous positions where they might still have ties, but it would be a lot more nebulous. So overall, I mean, my style of play was always, this position's unclear and unpleasant. Can I find a clear path to a tie? So I really respect moves like the 1 and 4 where, like, this looks awkward. I can't do the thing my hand's supposed to do. How can I make the game as clear as possible? Of course, the AI reasoned out this move very differently than I would, but I'm pleased with the move it played, and I think this was a pretty good game. Which brings us to game number 3. Yes, Turdz has comments first on this one. It was a pretty uneventful tie in the end, although achieved in an unusual way. Maybe I missed a trick in my playing days by not looking at the kind of move they played in 4 more often. It certainly forced a tie here. That said, this game wasn't wasted for me, because I think I learned something about my opponent's playstyle. That's one thing I did think I was quite good at, though admittedly it's easier in closed, as the best open players are capable of varying their moves depending on the game. However, when you know your opponent has a distinct style, learning it can give you a distinct advantage. This is a good point. I think it is truer in closed than open, though of course the best players in closed were also good at varying the style and the types of moves they were presenting, so the opponent couldn't go, okay, they played in 5, I played in a corner, I know they're going to go in the opposite corner, right? Because there were some players who would always do that if they had cards that remotely permitted, and there were other players who were very good at going, I do that maybe the first game, and I see how you respond, and then I start changing things and doing different tools. But the general idea of figuring out your opponent is really important to how tournament matches went, and I think these AI are complicated enough not to be just like, oh, that's obviously the way to take advantage of them. And I really hope no one watching thinks, I think I've solved this. But with enough games, you definitely do start to get a feel for the kind of moves they go for and how to penalize them. All right, they changed their hand this time. Although the level 6s, are opposites rather than corners this time, the theme of the hand seems to be the same, and that there are 4 cards designed to play off of each other. I wasn't so convinced by the 5777 as a utility card at this level, but it's easy to get caught out, so best not to underestimate it. I made a slight tweak to my hand too, replacing 2689 with 6289. In all truth, this hand is the one I meant to use in the first place, and I messed up slightly when I only had a text list to choose from. I'm so used to creating hands using both the text list and card select full of card images together. Yet the way Turdz made hands for this, I sent him a file that had all the cards in it so you could look at the images, and a document that listed all the numbers, but I don't have a better way to collate them than that at the moment, so it can be difficult to create hands. And Turdz was mostly doing it by looking at the numbers and trying to figure out what would match, and that's a very serious handicap in hand building. Okay, I think I was onto something when I said I'd learned their pattern of play. They started in 5 again, and this time I could see the same plan. 4-8-9-3 went nicely in 3 or 7, depending on the shape of the game after the next move. I considered it a while and came up with this. This time I made sure to quickly check for the possible reply in 1 or 7, given how the last game went, and I liked that my Siren could both capture and defend in the opposite spot should that happen. But I made this move essentially expecting them to reply in 3. I was prepared to let it happen this time, because I had a plan if they did, but also liked the look of the game, even if they didn't. So again, we know what red wants, right? Red wants to go in 3 or 9. 3 or 7. So moves in 1 or 9 made a lot of sense. And actually, I think 3, 7, 8, 4, Siren, and 1 would have been really strong here, because actually both of Blue's recaptures can be comboed back, or both of Blue's captures. Because if Blue wants to capture, Red. Ugh, I apologize. All right, so starting over Mike's statement, 3, 7, 8, 4, and 1, if they take it at some point in 2 with 9, 3, 4, 8, well, that can be comboed back with 6, 2, 8, 9, because 9 plus 3 equals 10 plus 2. And if they capture it with 3, 7, 4, 8, well, that too can be comboed by 6, 2, 8, 9, because 6 plus 9 equals 10 plus 7. Or 9 plus... Oh, I'm so sorry. Today's been a rough day. 9 plus 7 equals 6 plus 10. I can do arithmetic. So I think that move in 1 would have been similar to what Turdz did last game, and another really reasonable way to play, because Red does not want to go in 9, and because Red has some difficulty capturing it. Last game, they didn't have a way to capture his first move in 7 from 8, and this time they wouldn't have a safe way to capture 1 from 2, though they would have ways to capture it. But that said, I really like Turd's move here, because really Red is not great side to side. Even if they have a little more side to side power than the last hand did, they have no 9s in that direction. They cannot guarantee overpowering. A lot of their cards with 8s don't have like 6s to pair with the 8s or 7s to pair with the 8s. So those 8s are not going to be able to overpower opposing 8s and 9s. So Red doesn't really want a side to side game. And the only question is their corner move in 3 that their hand is clearly designed to do going to be strong, or does Turdz have an effective solution to it? I felt like they'd played right into my hands here. Before this move, I'd seen what looked like the perfect reply for me, took the time to scope it out again, and really liked where it was headed. I'm a big fan of this type of move. You think it gives up control of either 1 or 3, but it's very calculated. Importantly, they have no way of capturing 2, but even if they did, I have a combo in 6, so it makes that rather moot. I already mentioned 8, 9, 6, 2, and 7 earlier, which would work against any move they made in 1, while if they block 6, I'm pretty safe in 9. Other moves are available, but not optimal. Before playing in 2, I made sure I wouldn't get caught out by any combos on the bottom row late on. Otherwise, I was pretty confident. Yeah, so I find this move really interesting. I was actually, when watching this, I was assuming Turdz would play something safe in 1 and go from there. But this, I think, is a much better move than what I was expecting. Because if you think about positions with cards in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, who has the advantage is really dictated by who has the cards in 1, 2, and 3. Those are the cards that are probably not being comboed back. Those are the cards that are locked in. And if second turn controls 2 of them, then second turn should be in good shape. Except if the cards in 4, 5, and 6 are really easy to capture, it's pretty easy for at least 1 or 2 moves of first turn to tie. And so I think with cards in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 exactly, like that kind of block setup where 2 rows are filled and 1 is left open, usually, even if they kind of should be in trouble because the second turn player has secured more cards, first turn, in virtue of last turn, in virtue of a lot of cards being showing, so a lot of takes being possible, usually can manage a tie. So what I really like about Turd's reasoning here is that if the opponent goes in 1, he's not intending to go in 6, and I think 6 would not work as well there. He can go in 7 safely and lock in the card in 4. And similarly, if the opponent goes in 6, he's not planning to go in 1, even though that seems like a great square. You know, that's safe, that locks in some other stuff, but is rather intending to go in 9 and just making sure we don't get that kind of block setup. I don't have a name for it, but I think it has real drawish tendencies, and a good player will usually find their way to those ties. So I really like his game plan here. I do want to say, I do believe that Red has a tie here, and I think it is very difficult to find. And if anyone finds it and can put it in the comments, I will be deeply impressed, because I think it is a strange and very unobvious move, and one that, you know, takes a lot of calculation to find. But I do think Red has a tie here, and I will say Karen did not find it, and I'm sure I wouldn't find it in like a 3 or 5 minute game. I mean, I always like to think I'd find everything, but this is not the case. And I think this is a good move, and hopefully you find it. And if you want to just move on, that's fine. I'm not going to say the move. I will leave it in the ether. But let us continue. I think Turdz played this game really well, by the way. By playing in 6, they were maybe tempting me to play in 1, which is often a good idea, but here it would have likely led to a tie. However, with their rightward power gone, we could simply capture a 9 without reply. The 5777 was still showing itself as a weak link in their hand. Seeing out the win, and we called it here. Karen crushed, she loses. I tried to alliterate all the things, but couldn't think of a word starting with K that meant lost, so I decided to credit Ultimecia from FF8 and just spell something that really starts with a C with a K. This was a different sort of challenge to the previous round, and definitely a higher standard of opponent. This player's strength was having a game plan and sticking to it, and when their game plan was disrupted, finding a way out. Their biggest weakness was having a game plan and sticking to it, not adapting to the situation. I think the final game looked good for me after my first move regardless, but it's too early to say I had a definite win. However, by them playing the predictable move, I was able to take control. So overall in this third round match, and Turdz wins and earns his icon, and I think clearly earned it here. I think he pressed every game. I think every single game he had an advantage and pushed it nicely. I think in this game especially, and the previous one, he found really nice ways to reply to a center starter, such that the opponent just couldn't set up the kind of stuff they wanted to. And I think both were really exemplary instances of that, where in one he made sure they played in the corner that they didn't really have stuff for, and they ended up bailing out with a different move. And in this game, he sort of forced them to play the corner they did want to play, but in a situation where just had this very strong response that I think virtually every player would not be able to hold a tie against. So I think he put on a lot of pressure. Obviously, opponents have to make mistakes to lose, but you put on a lot of pressure game after game and you get your wins. And anyways, I think these are just very good games. These are, I think, my favorite. This last game is probably, it's got to be my favorite game Turdz has played so far. I just think his response to the starter was excellent. His second move was very strong, didn't just go for safety in 1, instead looked for safety in 2, and found this really nice setup where he was going to meet 1 and 7 and 6 and 9. So really nicely played game by Turdz. He goes on to the quarterfinals, and we can look at the bracket. He's versus Jenna Angel from Digital Devil Saga, who knocks out Mythos Yggdrasil from Tales of Symphonia. Because I didn't want to zone out and give the whole bracket, I listed what the other quarterfinals were. We have Lenneth Valkyrie versus Laguna Noir. We have Lynx versus Tifa Lockhart. And we have Yuri Hyuga versus Joker from Persona. And you can see the rule set there if you want to think about that. I think I will talk about the rule set in the next video. Turdz has made an icon. I've not made the icon for him, but this is where I'm going to stop recording this. Congrats to him on making his icon. I think he's played really well. I think just undeniably played very well throughout. And I think the AIs have been varied, right? I think Bugenhagen played really different than Karen did in the next round. And I don't know, I am pretty pleased with how different the AIs have worked out, and that they can put up good games against a good player, and they're going to keep getting tougher. So Turdz has made the quarterfinals. How deep will the run go? Will he go out in the quarters? Can he make the semis? Can he make the finals? Can he win the finals? We shall see.